Imagine carrying the hopes of 60 million people on your shoulders. Now imagine destroying those hopes in less than 1 second. That's exactly what happened in the biggest match on earth. One kick, one mistake, one moment so devastating that football fans still debate it decades later. But here's the crazy part. The player responsible wasn't a villain. He was supposed to be the hero, and the deeper you look into this story, the more shocking it becomes. What if I told you that the most expensive mistake in World Cup history wasn't worth thousands of dollars or even millions? It was worth an entire nation's dream. One kick, 1 second, one mistake, and more than 30 years later, people still can't stop talking about it. The strange part? The player responsible wasn't a rookie, he wasn't a backup, he wasn't even having a bad tournament. He was one of the greatest footballers on the planet, a man millions believed would become the hero of his country. Instead, he became the face of one of football's most heartbreaking moments, and to understand why, we need to travel back to the summer of 1994, the FIFA World Cup, hosted in the United States. For many Americans, football or soccer was still a growing sport, but the World Cup changed everything. Massive crowds filled stadiums, millions watched from home, and after weeks of drama, surprises, and unforgettable goals, only two teams remained: Brazil and Italy, two football giants. Together, they had already won multiple World Cups. This wasn't just a final, it was a battle between football royalty. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Win, and your name would be remembered forever. Lose, and the pain could last a lifetime. Now here's something important if you're new to football. A normal match lasts 90 minutes. If it's tied in a knockout game, another 30 minutes of extra time are played. And if nobody scores, the game goes to penalties. Imagine deciding the Super Bowl with a free throw contest. That's basically how dramatic it feels. And that's exactly what happened. After 120 exhausting minutes, the score was still 0-0. No goals, no winner, just tension. The kind of tension that makes even neutral fans nervous. Players were exhausted, legs were heavy, minds were racing. And then came the penalty shootout. One by one, players stepped forward. Some scored, some missed. With every kick, the pressure grew. Because penalties aren't really about skill. At this level, almost everyone can strike a ball well. Penalties are about surviving pressure. And World Cup pressure is unlike anything else in sports. Think about it. You aren't just representing yourself. You're representing millions of people, families, cities, entire countries. One mistake can become a national memory. And that's exactly what was about to happen. But before we get to the famous miss, there's something most people forget. Roberto Baggio wasn't just another player. He was Italy's superstar, their biggest hope, their magician, the player capable of changing games with a single touch. In fact, Italy might not have even reached the final without him. Earlier in the tournament, Baggio had rescued his team multiple times. When Italy struggled, he delivered. When Italy needed goals, he scored. He carried enormous expectations, and he kept answering. By the time the final arrived, millions of Italians believed their hero would finish the job. But football has a cruel sense of humor. The players who carry the biggest hopes often carry the biggest pressure, and pressure creates moments nobody sees coming. As the shootout unfolded, Brazil slowly gained the advantage, then Italy missed, then Brazil scored. The gap widened, the tension became unbearable, and eventually everything came down to one man, Roberto Baggio, the superstar, the hero, the player every Italian trusted. He placed the ball on the penalty spot. The stadium fell silent. Millions watched around the world. And suddenly, one of the greatest footballers alive stood completely alone. No teammates could help him. No coach could save him. No strategy mattered anymore. Just one kick. It's one of the strangest things about sports. A game involving 22 players can suddenly come down to a single moment. One human being, one decision, one action. Baggio stepped back, took a breath, started his run-up, and then he struck the ball. For a split second, nobody knew. Then the ball rose higher and higher and higher until it flew over the crossbar, over the goal, into history. Brazil were world champions, the World Cup was over, and Roberto Baggio stood there in disbelief. If you've never seen the image, it's haunting. A player staring into the distance, almost frozen, knowing the moment can never be taken back. No second attempt, no redo, no timeout, just reality. And here's what makes this story fascinating. Most people remember the miss, but very few remember everything that happened before it. Italy had played 120 minutes. Other players had missed penalties. Other opportunities had been wasted. The entire tournament contained hundreds of moments that affected the result. Yet history chose one image, one kick, one player, one memory. Why? Because our brains love simple stories, heroes, villains, success, failure. Reality is usually more complicated. But sports often get reduced to a single snapshot, and Baggio became that snapshot. What's even more surprising is that many football experts don't actually believe his miss was the biggest reason Italy lost. Think about it. If earlier penalties had gone differently, his kick might not have mattered at all. If Italy had scored during normal time, there would have been no shootout. If another chance had been converted, history changes completely. But that's not how fans remember things. Fans remember moments, and no moment was bigger than that miss. Now here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. You might think this mistake destroyed Roberto Baggio's career. Many athletes never recover from moments like this. Some disappear, some lose confidence, some are never the same again. But Baggio did something remarkable. He kept going. He continued playing at the highest level, continued producing incredible performances, continued earning respect, and over time something interesting happened. People stopped seeing him as just the player who missed. They remembered everything else, the goals, the skill, the creativity, the courage. Because that's another lesson sports teaches us. Failure is loud, but greatness lasts longer. In fact, many fans admire Baggio today precisely because he took responsibility, because he stepped up, because he accepted the risk, and that's something most people never consider. Everyone wants to score the winning penalty. Very few people volunteer for the possibility of missing it. Imagine standing in front of billions of viewers knowing one mistake could follow you forever. Most people wouldn't even want that responsibility, yet athletes accept it again and again. That's why football's greatest heroes often experience football's greatest heartbreaks. They're willing to take risks others avoid, and nowhere are those risks bigger than the World Cup. The World Cup is different from every other tournament. Leagues happen every year, championships return, new seasons begin. But the World Cup only arrives once every 4 years. Miss your chance and you may never get another one. For many players, it's the biggest stage they'll ever stand on, which is why mistakes feel larger. A mistake in a regular game might be forgotten in a month. A mistake in a World Cup final can survive for generations. Children who weren't even born in 1994 still know about Roberto Baggio's penalty. That's how powerful World Cup moments can become. And here's perhaps the most important lesson from this story. The difference between glory and heartbreak is often unbelievably small. If Baggio's shot had dropped a little lower, the story changes. If the goalkeeper dives the wrong way, the story changes. If one earlier moment unfolds differently, the story changes. History can turn on inches, sometimes less. That's what makes sports so addictive. You never know which moment will become immortal. You never know which decision will change everything. And sometimes the most unforgettable moments aren't the greatest victories. They're the heartbreaking mistakes. The ones that remind us athletes are human. The ones that show how much pressure exists at the highest level. The ones that make us wonder what we would do in the same situation. So was Roberto Baggio's penalty truly the most expensive mistake in World Cup history? Maybe. Maybe not. But it's certainly one of the most unforgettable, because it cost more than a trophy, more than a medal, more than a title. It cost a dream. And more than 30 years later, the world still remembers the moment that dream slipped away. One kick, 1 second, one mistake, and a place in football history forever. If you enjoyed this story and want more unbelievable World Cup moments, football mysteries, tactical secrets, and history explained for everyone, subscribe and join us for the next one. Because in football, the smallest moments often create the biggest stories.